Hello and welcome to Volante Technologies' report on global payments around the world, but really looking at what's in store for the next decade. And joining me here today, I have Matt Sarkar from Volante Technologies themselves. Matt, how are you doing here today?
Very well, Doug, and yourself?
Absolutely amazing. And Matt, I'm really excited to kind of understand a bit more about some of this payments modernization, because it's quite an abstract thought. Could you tell us a bit more about what that is and how that sits into the report?
Absolutely, and to your point, it certainly is, and I think abstract, of course, but I think it's a term that we often hear far too much.
Yeah.
And there's not so much very little understanding about it, but I think it's a very broad concept, right? So what we've done in the report, we've really narrowed it down to three common pillars. So the first pillar being cross-border interoperability, the second pillar being the drive or the push to instant and real-time payments. And of course, what's hot on everyone's mind at the moment is the migration to ISO 20022. So really around what banks can do with that additional data and how that's going to benefit customers moving forward. The report touches upon 10 different regions and countries. Of course, it's not extensive to those 10 countries and regions themselves, but what we really wanted to do is drill down into what's driving some of these markets, be that schemes, be that mandates, or be that government incentives, right? So for instance, you see in the Middle East that they're moving to a cashless society, heavily based on cash at the moment, but they're looking at 2030 being a vision of 75% of all payments being digital. So that's just one example of how, regions around the world or countries are really trying to modernize and what is driving that forward. I think one important aspect that is underpinned throughout is, of course, the enablement of today's technology, right? I mean, we wouldn't be modernizing without the tech itself. And to name but a few buzzwords, API, low-code platforms being one, proliferation of cloud technology being another, and really how we can interconnect with ecosystems and partner with the likes of fintechs around the world as well.
Now, that seems like a lot of institutions would struggle with their legacy systems. So how is the UK looking to tackle this? And how are they looking to future-proof going into this new decade, this next 10 years?
So the UK is an interesting market. I mean, albeit it's fairly small compared to the rest that we've covered in the paper, but really there's a huge shift in faster payments.
Yeah.
Right, and just the sheer amount and sheer volume of faster payments. In the UK, things have changed slightly in terms of rollout of adoption of ISO 20022. It was meant to be a two-phased approach, and now I think it's caused, let's say, some acceleration in that adoption of ISO.
Yeah.
And those best practices, so how are banks reacting to that, who's putting their best foot forward. I think that's always a struggle for banks. Do you hold back and sort of watch what other banks are doing and then you commit to that? But I think where we're going to see the issue is those banks that don't hit deadlines. It obviously means that I think the whole industry will then struggle, because you can't have some banks sending payment data with the full extensive set of ISO and other banks not.
Missing out.
Exactly.
Incredible. Now, with that in mind then, if we were to take that example and look at the interoperability that we're seeing when you share payments data in the Nordics, for instance, and the creation of P27, what's that going to do for that region itself?
Yeah, so I think P27 is a revolutionary initiative. It's been in the works for a while, and we've been talking about it for many years, especially at Volante and our customers within that region. But I think we're certainly on the right track where that's concerned. Really, P27 was introduced for cross-border payments, and really looking at the transparency of the payment, looking at the cost of the payment, and looking at the speed of the payment, right? So they're all really three key ingredients that banks need to be providing to their customers, right, to ensure that they are sustaining a good relationship and they can kind of future-proof their needs as a bank driving forward.
Yes. Now, speaking of that move, that innovation going forwards, we're seeing some places, for instance in South Africa, not really have adopted digital payments as much as they thought. So do you think we're finally going to start seeing digital payments, mobile payments, finally take a hold in South Africa?
Absolutely, and I think the key word there, Doug, is finally, right? So despite Saab's initiative last year and best efforts to increase digital payments, we're still seeing around 70 to 90 of all transactions, 90% of all transactions being cash-based.
Wow,
right?
okay.
So I think we're now on the straight and narrow where that's concerned.
Yep.
South Africa introduced the RPP, which really sets precedents to help drive digital payments and the evolution of digital payments for high value and low value payments themselves.
That's brilliant, hearing that kind of that strata. It's not just high payments that are being focused on, it's actually innovation across the board. Now, an area that really does take that into mind because of all the various different regulations is the MENA region, the Middle East. You know, can you tell us about some of the innovations that you saw there too?
Yeah, so I was actually in the Middle East recently in Dubai. So Volante ran a roundtable there with around 14 banks and partners.
Yeah.
And I think, again, the conversation within that region has definitely sort of amplified around cross-border and the innovations around cross-border, right?
Yeah.
And typically that's based on the geographical nature of the Middle East and the supporting and surrounding countries themselves. What we found was really, really driving that region is actually the, I think, acceleration of fintechs coming into that space. So what I mean by that is in 2017, we were looking at around 80 fintechs within the Middle East.
Right, okay.
That's now grown, so 3-4 years on, you're looking at around 800 financial.
That's quite the growth.
Yeah, so it's huge, right? And I think for banks, there's always going to be this misconception of, well, they're eating our lunch and, you know, they're competitive by nature to our offerings and what we're doing. And I think to an extent that's true.
Yeah.
However, I think there's an opportunity for traditional financial institutions to be learning from these fintechs. A lot of them, of course, are built from cloud native technology.
Yeah.
And of course, what does that mean? Well, it actually means for their customers, they're going to be delivering best-in-class services and solutions. They can build them a lot quicker. And it also means that they can reduce their operational cost of running their business, right? So it's this huge shift from CapEx to an operational expenditure model.
Yeah, and I think that's really going to enable the banks to finally realise what they're missing out on. Now, moving over to probably one of the largest payment markets, the United States, and obviously such a wealth of cloud-native organisations based out there. But one thing that always sticks out to mind, obviously, quite cash-based, quite check-based, but we're starting to see, for instance, innovations like real-time payments actually finally take a hold across all 50 states.
I think we are, yes, and I think, you know, we're still seeing those cash-based transactions fairly high and significant. Check, definitely.
Yeah.
But $49 trillion of payments were transacted within the US last year, right?
Wow.
So, I mean, that's huge in terms of growth alone.
Yeah.
And what's happened is the Federal Reserve have actually kind of taken that as an opportunity to launch what they're calling the FedNow service, which launches in 2023.
Right.
And that alone, paired with the use of ISO 20022 payment data, I think is going to be significant and game-changing for the US.
It's absolutely incredible, and I've just got to say a massive thank you for sharing some of these insights. It does seem to almost your third pillar, just hearing about the global standard ISO 20022, really running alongside, driving all these changes. It's absolutely fascinating. So Matt, I've got to say a massive thank you for being on the show. It's been brilliant hearing your insight.
No, thanks for having me, Doug.
Absolute pleasure.